Hi everyone, Sean here. Welcome to the presentation, Retirement Countdown. I've had the privilege of working with clients over almost 30 years in helping them to both plan for retirement and to be retired. We've learned a few things over those years, and so this presentation is specifically designed for those people who are really beginning to think serious about their retirement. So if you're about 5 years out and you want to begin thinking about and planning for your retirement, we're going to share some really important strategies that you need to be mindful of when you're planning your retirement. It also will talk about some homework assignments and various resources that you'll be able to make use of as you begin planning for retirement. You know, it's one of the most important transitions that we make in our life. It's a major life transition, a major financial transition that has impacts with our relationships, our finances, our sense of purpose. There's a whole host of intersection points when it comes to retirement income planning. So as you begin planning for this adventure, this important journey, I'd encourage you to take a look at this video and make sure you take a look at the show notes for this presentation. We'll have a whole bunch of resources that you can take advantage of as you begin planning for your retirement.
Now when I scan the room, some of you are already retired. And for you, it might be more, are there some things that I should be thinking about, maybe some options I've not thought about, maybe just a reconfirmation of all the different things I should be addressing. Some of you are on just the cusp of retirement. And so you're just a year out or within 5 years of retirement. And so this would be a very practical presentation to help you think about the key aspects of retirement income planning. So it's hard for me to believe it's been almost 30 years since I started working in this industry. And we've literally walked hundreds of families through this progression from full-time work to retirement. And we've learned a few things along the way. So we hope to give you a little bit of guidance, a little bit of wisdom that you can take advantage of. So that's a bit of the overview for the presentation. So I put together this slide, or I got this picture, this image, because I think for a lot of people it's a great representation of what retirement planning sometimes feels like. When my dad retired back in the 80s, it was a lot simpler. He walked into his pension and benefits office with his work. He had spent 35 years with the same company, and they went over his retirement income option, and he had a couple of options to choose from, and he picked the option, and that was it. My dad didn't have, and there weren't a lot of people at that time with a ton of RSP money. There weren't the same options or flexibilities. And as the years have gone by, it's gotten really, really complicated. And so for us, we do this multiple times every single year. But for the average client or individual, how many times do you retire? Hopefully once, right? Hopefully you don't have to do a redo. And so you're making the most significant, some of the most significant financial decisions of your life, going through a major life transition, and you're having to deal with a lot of different complexities. And so we're going to talk about some of the main areas you need to focus in on to try to cut through some of the clutter. So this is how it feels. We have pension plans and benefits, and what about annuities and life expectancy and social benefits and all kinds of things kind of apply to this whole area. And so we're going to try to cut through the clutter so that at the end of this presentation, this is going to be how you'll feel. So you have like a Zen-like calm, right? You just feel completely calm about your planning and what you need to be doing. Now, what's interesting about this whole area is that a lot of polling gets done in retirement planning. Back in 2014, I'll just kind of allude to a couple of studies that were put together. In June 2014, the Conference Board of Canada, this is in October, it released it to the Toronto Star. They reported it widely. And in that study, the Conference Board of Canada, I think it was over 2,000 respondents. And 40% of those respondents said they had absolutely no idea how much money they needed to have to retire. Another study was done by BlackRock and investment managers just a year ago, said 59% of Canadians say they are currently saving for their retirement, but many are not necessarily confident they're doing it effectively. And nearly half, 48%, say they are concerned they'll outlive their savings, and half are concerned about the future generation's ability to save for their own retirement. So there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of confusion, there's a lack of clarity, and certainly there's a lot of sort of just a lack of confidence around this whole planning area. So what we're going to try to do is to give you a little bit of planning confidence as it relates to this area. So the first thing I want you to write down, and by the way, you will get access to these slides, and I'll talk about how you do that at the end of the presentation. So the first thing is your retirement planning readiness and your current planning success really is driven off your vision. You need to have a really clear vision for what retirement's going to look like for you. And when I talk about vision, the things I'm talking about are, some are financial, but some are non-financial related issues. So things as simple as, where will I live? Not just the city or the province, but what kind of accommodations. We see clients, we've had a lot of clients transition to retirement, and I've seen multiple moves. This isn't probably new for many of you, but you have your principal residence, and you see clients purchasing condominiums or life lease arrangements, and eventually going into retirement homes, and then sometimes long-term care facilities. How will you spend your time? And we'll talk about the emotional and psychological aspects of retirement. How will you cultivate meaning? A lot of people get meaning from the work and the activities and the connection points they get while they're working. What will your lifestyle needs be? So what will the actual dollars be that you need on an after-tax basis to facilitate or run your lifestyle goals? Is creating a legacy important to you? For some of you, legacy creation is not important at all. For others of you, it is important, and that has an impact on how you plan for retirement and how you handle your finances. Will paid employment factor into your retirement? So for a lot of people, it's not retire at 55 or 60 or 65. It's often a transition. And we're seeing that more and more and more, where people transition to retirement, phase down in terms of work to contract work, but it's very rare now that I see someone just retire and it's done. It's usually a gradual phase. So what does that look like for you? And is there some planning you need to be doing? So it starts with vision. And so study after study confirms that if you have a clear vision for all those aspects of your retirement, you'll be more successful in your planning. So point number 2 that you want to write down is that retirement's not just about money. There is a psychological or emotional aspect to retirement planning. Now, most of the work that I do is money related in terms of people being set up to generate certain kinds of income for the retirement. But the reality is that the emotional piece and psychological piece is almost as important. And so many studies have come out. McKinsey Institute did a study just recently. And some of the things that they talked about in that study, as you think about this transition to retirement, were things like a loss of identity. So very common for many people transitioning to retirement because they found a lot of meaning in the work that they do, and this isn't everyone. I mean, some people don't find identity in their work. They find identity in their hobbies or other interests. But for many people, there's a loss of identity. There's a loss of friendships and social connections and community. This is probably one of the biggest ones that I've seen with my own clients. Those clients that had active social connections, service groups, community involvement, they were very engaged in areas outside their work, transitioned very, very well into retirement. For those folks where work was pretty much everything, and they didn't have connections outside of work, it was a challenge to find a sense of connection. And when we talk about health and longevity, those social dynamics are absolutely critical. And so you need to think through, what will my social connections be? I did a blog post recently, and I blogged about the notion of friendship. And Aristotle had 3 definitions of friendship, but one definition of friendship was very utilitarian. It's the friendships that develop around common goals, interests. It could be work. But what you find with sports teams, work relationships, is that they're very transient. In other words, the minute you leave that setting, how often do those relationships continue? Often they don't. Often they just transition out of your lives and you go on to a new set of relationships and new activities that you go to. And so for a lot of us, a lot of our friendships and social arrangements are built around either direct or indirect connections around a work, professional groups, that kind of thing. And we need to think through the implication if we're outside that context. We see very commonly people facing what's called choice dilemma. And it creates inertia and a lack of just good quality decision making, sometimes no decision making. And I'll tell you, sometimes no decision making is not the best decision. But this choice dilemma creates this inertia and people just don't make the decisions they should. So if you look at this whole transition, William Bridges wrote a book quite a few years ago called Transitions. And if you haven't read the book or seen it, I write down the title, Transitions by William Bridges. And he talks about no matter how well you plan, there's 3 transition phases. There's the ending and letting go. And this happens really at the subconscious level, right? We're not conscious of these things. So when you're feeling a little bit out of your skin a bit, this is what's going on. And so as we transition to a new reality, we are letting go. We have a neutral zone. We're trying to absorb psychologically, emotionally, the new reality. And for some people, that transition go for a long period of time. And others, it's very short. Depends on how well you prepared for that transition. And then there's a new beginning. But there are actual psychological and emotional pieces that each one of us will go through in retirement and as we get older that are just subconscious. We need to be ready for them because it can create some additional complexity, both emotionally and psychologically, if we're not conscious that that's a reality as we go through retirement. And then finally, as we talk about the emotional, psychological, really, this is a great schematic for the different aspects. We have the vocational aspects. People find meaning in their vocation. How will you replace that? There's the intellectual pursuits. Many people, a big chunk of their intellectual flexing the intellectual muscle happens through their work context. There's a spiritual. For some people, that can be spiritual traditions, mainline traditions that we think about. For other people, it's just cultivating a sense of purpose and meaning. A lot of people get purpose and meaning out of their current context before they retire. There's a physical aspect. And I'll tell you that physically it's a critical one. What are the things that we can do now, not just before retirement, but in retirement, to cultivate physical energy and capacity? Okay, that's part of a good, satisfying retirement. And of course, you talked about emotional. Financials we'll talk about in a bit of detail in a few minutes, which is obviously an important aspect. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is cash flow needs. Now, believe it or not, something as simple as cash flow ends up being one of the most critical areas that derails people around the retirement income planning and creates problems for them. So before people retire, they have sometimes excess or extra capacity. They have income, maybe both husband and wife are working or partner, and so money's coming in, money's going out. They seem to be tracking in the right direction of their goals. But very often, many people have never gone through the exercise of tracking what their expenses are. And it's really critical as you phase into retirement and as you're retired that you understand the difference between your discretionary expenses and your non-discretionary expenses, because that gives you the capacity to be flexible as we go through the ebbs and flows of economies and expense needs and market changes. Knowing the difference between discretionary and non-discretionary expenses is critical. So I often say to people, first time going through retirement planning engagement, how much money do you think you'll need on an after-tax basis to maintain your lifestyle? And very often people don't have any clarity around that. They start throwing some rules of thumb my way. 70% of pre-retirement income. Stuff they've heard in the media. And it's very much a calculation of one. It's your calculation. There's no rules of thumb. So you need to sit down and look at your after-tax income, and we have some worksheets that I'll give you a link to after this presentation to get you to focus on what am I actually spending. I'm not necessarily a big believer in budgets, but I do think it's really important to track expenses for periods of time. And so when we go through that, we get a real true sense as to what our expense trends are. So when you get your after-tax income paid to you, when the money comes into your home, there might be some expenses as well that you're not going to be incurring when you retire. What are some examples? Bus fare, okay, good example. Travel downtown to work every day, bus fare. Are you making RSP contributions anymore when you retire? Probably not, right? That's what you were saving money for, was retirement. Maybe you don't need 2 cars anymore, right? So maybe you've got mortgage payments that are done, where you think that your loan payments will be pretty much all done by the time you retire or just into retirement. So you can take that off. So there's a number of expenses. You won't have those when you retire. Net that off. Take your net income that you're getting off your paycheck directly into your bank account. Net off for those expenses that you don't think you'll have when you retire, and that's a good starting point. And like I said, we've got a video and a worksheet that will walk you through that exercise. So here's an example, just very practically. We have a net income coming into this family of $5,000. We have got a mortgage payment of $600 a month that they know is going to be gone by the time they retire. There's RSP contributions each month. We've got a stock purchase program that's going in off their bank account, and parking costs. Just an example, it could be bus costs, there's parking costs sometimes. There's about $1,300 a month going out right now that won't be going out when they retire. So for this particular client, we know that they're $5,000 a month less that net. They need at least $3,700 a month coming to them every month when they retire to replace that current lifestyle that they're experiencing. Okay? So that's the first critical issue, is track your expenses periodically, understand discretionary and non-discretionary. Why you want to understand the difference between is non-discretionary are basic expenses that will never change. They'll always be there. Food, utilities, probably your phone, right? And then discretionary expenses will be things like travel, extra holidays, gifts for the grandchildren, whatever. Why would that be important to distinguish between those two different types of expenses? Any idea?
One can be adjusted, the other can't.
Right, and one can be adjusted, the other can't. So what's the practical application to your investment portfolio?
Figure out what that is.
Yeah, so, okay, we're going through a little bit of market volatility right now, right? So let's say somebody's taking money from their portfolio. If they've got money earmarked for expenses, right, that they've got in their budget in a conservative investment holding, are they going to be worrying about things? Not likely. So you want to make sure that whatever those discretionary expenses are, non-discretionary, you have money earmarked for those expenses. If you don't have enough money earmarked for those discretionary expenses in a conservative part of your portfolio, and there's a bit of short-term market volatility, what would be the wise decision right now on how you handle that portfolio? Probably don't take the money out right now. Leave it in there. Well, if you understand the difference between your discretionary and non-discretionary, you know what capacity you have to make that distinction. Doesn't mean you won't spend the money. It just means you'll put it on hold for now until we see an improvement in markets. So as you retire, it's really important to get a sense for those numbers. Okay, so let's go on to the next point, pensions. Next to cash flow, I'm not shocked, but it's one of the biggest part of most people's retirement plans, and yet probably the most misunderstood in terms of how it actually works in a client's plan. So write it down. I want to understand how my pension plan works, and what are some of the questions you need to ask. Again, we've got a video and a PDF document that actually goes through all the key questions to ask if you're currently employed and have a pension plan, that you should have clarity before you retire. You don't want any surprises in this area. So what are some of the questions that you should ask? Is your pension plan defined benefit or defined contribution? I'll talk about that in a second. Is it a formula plan with a guaranteed income, or is it a plan that just you add money, they add money, and it grows to something, and eventually you get an income from it? If you get a pension from your employer, is it cost of living indexed? Will it go up with inflation? As it goes up with inflation, is that contractual? Right? Is it built into how that plan is designed? Or is it ad hoc or at the discretion of your employer? Okay, you need to understand that piece. When you retire before age 65 from your pension plan, will there be supplemental benefits that your employer will pay out until you get to age 65 as a bridge? Do you have bridging options with your pension plan? When you retire, will your pension plan drop at age 65 when you get CPP or old age security benefits? Some pensions do that, so they integrate with CPP and OAS at age 65. What about survivorship benefits? What are the minimum survivorship benefits? In this province, it's basically if you have a spouse, it's 2/3 survivorship benefits. If I get a pension, I die prematurely, my spouse will get 2/3 of that pension. The only way a spouse wouldn't get that 2/3 is if they waive their right to that pension. Okay? There's a whole myriad of pension options. And so if you are not retired yet, and you haven't gotten a recent pension estimate, and you haven't gotten your HR department to give you a list of all your benefits, all your pension options, make sure you do that. Okay? If you're 5 years away from retirement, you need to start getting that detail worked out. Okay, let's go to different aspects of producing income. Okay, so there's a whole, this is the complexity I talked about. My dad retired in the mid-80s, early 80s, pretty straightforward. So now we retire. Those of you who are retired or will be retiring, We're looking at Canada Pension Plan. It's a big question, right? A lot of people go, well, should I take it early and take a hit on my income if I take it at age 60? Do I wait to age 65? I can even push it back past age 65 and get a higher income. Did anyone have a perspective on whether they should take Canada Pension Plan early or not? Take it early? Any other perspectives? Take the money and run? So Canada Pension Plan, the average payout across all people getting CPP right now is $629 a month. The maximum at age 65 is $1,092 per month. If you take it early today, at age 60, that's a 36% reduction. It used to be that the crossover point was age 77, roughly, 76. Meaning, if I took the higher pension at age 65, as opposed to age 60, how long would I have to live until I would be better off taking the higher pension, right? And the crossover point's about age 76. And so a lot of clients go, well, when do I want to be ahead of the game? From age 60 to 76 or from 76 on? Well, most people go, well, I want to be ahead of the game, have the cash flow, right, through that earlier period. Life expectancy for males is age 76. So if you're healthy at age 60, you'll live past that. But most people go, I'm going to take the money and run. Another reason is survivor benefits on CPP are very meager. If you and your spouse have both worked and you have CPP benefits and one of you dies prematurely, there's really no survivor benefit. There's a $2,500 check you get, but that's it. So if you put 40 years worth of contributions into that plan, again, another reason why you want to take the money and run. Now, if your partner doesn't have CPP benefits built up, they'll be eligible for survivor benefits. So in that situation, it's not quite as compelling. But if both of you worked, you built up CPP benefits, there's probably not a big advantage in deferring. Old age security benefits, next one. You know what the benefit is per month? Some of you are probably receiving it. Yeah, I got $570.52 now. So it gets indexed quarterly. So every 3 months you get an index, whereas CPP is indexed once a year. But those two payments, those two benefits, a lot of people kind of eschew, like kind of poo-poo CPP and OAS, but I mean that's potentially $1,500 a month, right? It's not insignificant, and it could be $1,500 a month times 2, so that's not unimportant. Defined contribution pension plans. Okay, so some of you might have plans where you're adding money, company's adding money, it's growing, you have to make investment decisions. A lot of the work that I do is in that area with clients, trying to give them some general guidance on how to coordinate their defined contribution pension plan with their own planning. Defined benefit plans. There's a lot of people go, I've got a great plan, defined benefit. 2% times years of service times the average of my best or last 5 years working. But there's a whole range of defined benefit plans. There's some plans that use your career average earnings since day one. There's some plans that use the best 5 years. Sometimes they'll use the last 5 years. So there's quite a lot of variability in how that formula works. So make sure that as a homework assignment, if you don't understand that formula, that you come to understand it. You don't want it to be a surprise just before you retire. Non-registered accounts. So a lot of people have money outside their RSPs, and they'll use that money to supplement their pensions. We have annuities sometimes. You're not seeing a lot of annuities being purchased these days. Any reason why? What's the biggest driver around annuity payments? So I give money to the insurance company. They commit to pay me for the rest of my life and income. Interest rates. So the 10-year bond rate, government bond rate, kind of drives as part of the calculation. It's an actuarial calculation, but it's also there's interest rates attached to it. We're at a historical low in interest rates. So obviously the monthly income you can generate from annuities right now is historically low. So you're not seeing as much in the way of annuity payments. My dad, when he retired in '82 from SaskTel, they had kind of a hybrid plan. It was like a defined contribution plan, but he had spent almost 40 years working for SaskTel, and they said, okay, here's the pot of money, and they only had one option, which is an annuity option. And so he annuitized 40 years worth of pension assets in 1982. Anyone remember what interest rates were in 1982? You remember what your mortgage rate was? Yeah. Yeah, 18% mortgage rates, 21% 5-year GIC rates. So my dad was very fortunate. He annuitized at the highest interest rate period we've ever experienced. And he was working, it was the Grant Devine years. I'm not sure if you remember the PC government in Saskatchewan, Grant Devine. And they just basically fired a whole bunch of civil servants. My dad got caught up in that. Ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to him. He became a real estate agent and life went on. But it was interesting. You saw interest rates go down, inflation goes down, and he had this long-term lifetime income locked in. So he was very, very, very fortunate. Okay, so this is can get very complicated. So I'm going to talk about how we coordinate all these different income sources. We have our RIFs and our LIFs and our PRIFs and our annuities, OLAS, CPP, TFSAs. By the way, TFSAs probably should be the last account that you should dig into. And one of the reasons for that, it's the only place you can invest money where it's tax-free growth. And then when the money comes out, it's tax-free, right? You have to pay tax on your RSPs or RIFs or PRIFs eventually. It doesn't make sense to defer that money forever. You want to bring it into income. 12.3? Good. Okay, so I've given you a little bit of an introduction to the different pieces. So cash flow, really focus in on that. If I had to give you, like I said, an area that causes most people issues and concern in retirement, is they didn't properly assess what their cash flow needs were. It's really important you pay attention to that. Secondly, make sure you pay attention to the emotional and psychological aspects of this transition. Third, of course, there's a lot of pieces going on in terms of retirement income planning. So the first thing we need to do in this process is we need to marry your life goals. We talked about all those things before. You need to marry your life goals and different aspects of your life with your money. And the thing that I see a lot of people do is, again, they don't commingle the two. They keep their money decisions very separate to some of the financial decisions they're making and their impact to their lifestyle. So you can't separate your life from your money when it comes to retirement income planning. That money drives a certain lifestyle. It drives a certain assumption around how much money you're going to need in the future. That incomes can be impacted by inflation assumptions. And so it's really important you marry those two. What are your life goals? That's going to drive a certain income need, and let's link the two together. So one of the things that we do, and I use my dad again as an example, retirement income planning was really, really straightforward when he retired. This is an example from a chart in an analysis that we do. Many of you have gone through this analysis in this room, where we basically take every aspect of your finances and we drill it down to a central set of spreadsheets, and we begin to model what the future will look like using inflation rates and tax brackets and different sources of income. And in this situation, what we have is the brown and the yellow represents various sources of pension income that the client had. And we modeled that particular scenario. And the green were the financial assets that the client had. The lifestyle goal, which I believe is around $55,000 a year after tax. And we indexed it at just over 2% a year. And that's why it's going up over time. And you can see towards age 79, that green is greatly diminished. And what's happened in this theoretical analysis for the client is that we've got more life than income. Right? So clearly not a good situation. This is a really, really helpful financial analysis that links the client's lifestyle goals with their financial situation, and we can begin modeling how are they on track, are there gaps, and we call it a gap analysis. And so ideally, when you do this modeling, you want to make sure when you take into account your CPP, your OES, your company pension plans, your non-registered holdings, your TFSAs, all those investment accounts you have, and you begin modeling your lifestyle goals, you want to know before you retire whether you're tracking in the right direction. These assumptions are driven off, or this analysis is driven off by a lot of different assumptions. What would be some of the key assumptions we'd use in this analysis? Just throw out some ideas. Pardon? Travel. So you got lifestyle, so travel. Anything else? Inflation. Yeah, inflation's a big one. Sorry? Health. Absolutely. Investment return. So I can, one client will say, listen, Sean, I really want to be conservative. I'm a money under the mattress investor, which is fine. But we need to understand the implications of that decision, right? So if you were getting a 5-year GIC rate today, a term deposit rate, what would the rate be today? 2.5 maybe?
Oh,
So there's nothing wrong with buying guaranteed investments, but when we use 2.5 for a return, and inflation's what today? Well, 2.5%, is basically the inflation rate, the overall inflation rate on an annualized basis, right? So I have clients that we can model a guaranteed rate, 2.5% inflation, and they have sufficient investment capital in addition to their pensions to reach their goals. But the terminal value of their net worth, the goose that lays the golden egg gets killed gradually over time, right? And they're okay with that as long as the portfolio matches their risk temperament. I've got some clients that go, I don't want to be out of money by age 79. I do want to take a conservative approach. That's what you've modeled for me, Sean, but I understand that probably I need to be a little bit balanced in my portfolio. I'll have some conservative money, but I need something that might give me a little bit more growth over my life expectancy. I'm not going to be too concerned about the next year or the next 2 years. I'm focused on the next third of my life. So what kind of portfolio is going to drive a situation where that gap is looked after? And so the gap analysis that we do, and again, most of you have gone through this, there's two questions. Are my goals achievable? And then quite simply, if they're not, I want to know that in advance, and then I'll readjust my planning. For many of you that are retired, and again, if I look at this room, I'll do one of these analysis once a year for many of you. You just want to know where you stand. Here are our assets, here are our pensions, here's what I'm spending. Are we on track? Are we going in the right direction? It's a huge peace of mind exercise for those clients to understand objectively as they take all the different aspects of their planning, are they tracking in the right direction? Now, what's really interesting about this process, and I've alluded to it already, is that sometimes I'll talk to investors and they'll go, how did my portfolio do relative to the TSX? Or how did it do relative to the S&P 500? How did it do relative to fixed-term investments? Or how did it do relative to a balanced portfolio of all balanced portfolios in the universe? And although that's not an unreasonable question, the thing that I'll think about is, no, the proper question is, how did your portfolio do relative to your goals? To me, that's the only return number that matters. So if I do this analysis for a client, and we confirm to fill that gap, we need to get a 5.75% return. This is an example. Then when we're building a portfolio, and there's all this constellation of returns out there, the return that we're going to be shooting for is at 5.75. So what can we do with the highest level of probability for hopefully the lowest level of risk to drive that goal return? What is your personal return to achieve your goals? And let's build a portfolio that's consistent. That's very uncommonly done out there. Most investors look at their portfolio in a vacuum. Here's my portfolio. They never link it back to the plan. And they should be intimately linked when you do your retirement income planning. So when we build portfolios, it really is, a goal-based plan. The only return that matters is yours. So what return do you need to reach your goals? Now, a lot of people, so that's the cash flow planning around retirement. So the next area is insurance planning. A lot of people don't think they have a need for life insurance or other kinds of coverages, and I would say in general that's correct. But I really like this image because it really summarizes for some of you how you'll want to look at risk management. So for most people, they won't have a lot in the way of insurance portfolios still in place by the time they retire. So when you look at this chart, see if I can get this laser working here. So down here, this is kind of a neat section. We have income protection and asset protection. How are we doing for time, Janelle? 12:40? Okay. So income protection, what does that imply? So I've got employment income, and if I become disabled, I want to make sure that I'm replacing that income because my employment income is what drives all this stuff down the road. That's assets. Okay, so we have what's called our human value, our ability to work and produce and generate income allows us to have the capacity to have the ability to build up financial assets that will replace that human value, our work value over time, whether it's pensions or investments or that kind of thing. You want to make sure you've got disability coverage to protect that income generation ability. As you get on in life, it becomes less about income protection and more about asset protection. So a lot of people will look at insurance planning in a way that goes from I want to provide insurance monies to provide for my dependents, my children and my kids. So many of you know I've got 4 kids, 9, 14, 18, and 19, soon to be 20. I still have a number of years where some of my kids will be dependent on my ability to earn income. And because my wife made a decision to be at home over those years, she's dependent upon the income I generate as well. I carry a lot of life insurance. Something happened to me, I want to make sure my family's looked after in that event. I'm hoping down the road, once those kids are launched, I may not need as much insurance. Okay, so down here, as we go through that life cycle, you have things like long-term care coverage. This is an area that's not commonly explored in Canada, which I think it will be over the next decade. As baby boomers age, right, and as we see longevity in the population, I don't know, I'm not a healthcare expert. I'm just thinking that if the healthcare system is already constrained and struggling under the weight of looking after the needs, in another decade or 20 years, it'll probably really struggle. So the biggest concern, of course, you see this in the States, which is it's more prevalent, right, because the system's more fragmented. But the thing that people end up doing when it comes to this area is looking at strategies to deal with long-term care costs. That's a reality. That's an investment erosion of assets, right? So how do we protect ourselves against that erosion? And then you see some people putting in place insurance coverages actually as asset protection. We often have clients purchasing what's called permanent life insurance. Sometimes it's term 100, sometimes it's whole life coverage. And a lot of people I know will go, well, why in the world would somebody at age 60 buy a life insurance contract? What conceivable reason could there be for them to have a need for life insurance? And there's probably 2 or 3 really common reasons. Number one, we have clients who have an inclination now around legacy planning. They want to pass on a legacy, and one of the most efficient ways of doing that, if the person's insurable, is through life insurance. It's a tax-free death benefit. They spend their retirement capital the way they want. They know when they retire they've got this legacy benefit in place. They'll get paid out. It's very elegant, very simple. That's one reason. Farm families. One farming son, 2 other kids, one in Toronto, one in Vancouver. The other 2 kids aren't involved in the farm. Farms are asset rich, they're cash poor. Does a farming son want to have 2 siblings as partners when mom and dad are gone? No. So it's not uncommon for farm families to buy insurance on mom and dad's life. When the last to die situation happens, mom and dad, insurance gets paid out. The farming son uses that money to buy out his siblings. He owns the farm, they have cash from the sale. Cottage property, very common one. We've got Lake of the Woods, very large tax bills attached to cottages. These are often not wealthy families. And in fact, often these properties have to be sold to pay the tax bill when mom and dad are gone. So you'll see families will buy life insurance to preserve asset value. So those are just some examples. So many people don't have a need for insurance as they get older, but some people do based on their planning needs. And that's why developing the plan is so important. So many of you, you'll have to give me an assessment at some point how we're doing in this area. For those of you that are guests today, you don't have a sense for what we do in terms of the coaching relationship, but I do want to talk about it a little bit because I think it's really critical. This data is really, really interesting. We think about coaches in a lot of different areas. We don't often think about it as it relates to financial arenas, right? I think money is a little bit like education. We all went through the school system, so surely we have our 2 cents worth that we can speak to around education. We seem to be able to feel we have that right even though we aren't in the system, we haven't designed it, we're not teaching. I think money management is kind of the same way. There's a lot of do-it-yourselfing that goes on out there. And I'm not saying that do-it-yourselfing is not appropriate, but there needs to be an understanding, not for all people, but for some people, financial coaching is absolutely critical, and the data really confirms that a coaching relationship in this area pays dividends. So Ipsos Reid did a study, and they looked at thousands of families across Canada. What they found was those families that were advised households had roughly almost 3 times the investment assets after 4 to 6 years of this relationship than non-advised households. And if you look at a period of 7 to 14 years, they had almost 5 times the financial value, and over a period of 7 to 14 or 15 plus years, it was up to 7 times the value. significant differences in net worth and asset value. And I'd like to say that it's because the advisor, had just astounding recommendations that they made and just some magical investment solutions that outperform the market consistently. But I'm going to show you one example as to why advisors were able to do this in a coaching relationship with their clients. This is an interesting chart. It looked at aggregate, and this is from, I think the time period is 1992 to 2011. And they looked at all equity growth funds in aggregate, and they said over that time period, what was the return? Net of fees, the return was 8.2%. And then they looked at the average return of investors in that investment category, and the return was 3.5%. There's a huge delta between what the average investment did and what the average investor did. And I don't think I'm telling you anything new as to why would there be a difference there. Many of you were clients of mine in 2008. Okay, we saw unprecedented market volatility then. We're seeing market volatility today. What do you think the role of the advisor is in the midst of that volatility? And it's not just volatility during market volatility. It's volatility in life events.
Don't take your money out. Ride the wave.
Yeah, so the advisor is there to give context, a sense of perspective, right? In 2008, did I have clients who were hanging by their fingertips? For sure I did, right? Now, do we have clients every year going through divorces, separations, death of a spouse, retirement, major transitions, where there's heightened emotion around those transitions? Do you think that when we go through those transitions, that is a conducive period for making wise financial decisions? No, often people, their amygdala is like full-blown, their prefrontal cortex is shut down, they have a very, very myopic, very sort of narrow view of their options. And what financial advisors should be doing over time is helping their clients over a lifetime not make the big mistake. Believe it or not. The big mistake is what can derail people financially. So the financial advisor or coach is there to make sure that there's sober second thought, to provide context, sometimes coaching. I'll have conversations regularly with clients where, did you get your will done? How about the power of attorney? Do we get the TFSA in? What about the RSP, right? I have a good enough relationship with the client that they don't hang up the phone on me. They're cool with the conversation. They don't mind being held accountable. That is a really, really important process around long-term financial success, is that accountability. So my one counsel to you, for those of you who are guests, if you're not working with an advisor, it doesn't have to be our firm, but if you're not working with an advisor and you're doing it yourself, I don't know of any area in life where if you are off to the side doing it yourself without counsel, accountability, objectivity, coaching, it's very difficult to outperform. All good performers in other areas have coaches. And so having a money coach or coach in this area I think is critical. There's another chart here, and I'll just close with this one. This is really just about confidence. And I think that what this chart talks about is the degree of confidence. The blue is people who are from advised households. The red from individuals that are non-advised. And almost every area, whether it's do they have enough for retirement, do you feel like they're tracking in the right direction. On almost every area they look at, people just felt generally a little more confident, right? Because they had other counsel speaking into their situation over that time frame. Okay. That is the formal presentation. Now, what I'd like to do is cover off a couple of things. Now, for those of you that are clients here today, if it's been a while since we've done the gap analysis, or even if it hasn't been done a while, you're just going, I've enjoyed the presentation, Sean. You reconfirmed some things that we've done before. I wouldn't mind sitting down with you and just getting this updated. Really find that to be a peace of mind exercise. Then we can do that for you. You know that we're always available to go through the analysis with you. So in the feedback form, they have feedback forms in the package, right? Do you know? Yeah. So in the feedback form, there's an opportunity for you to just reconfirm, yeah, I'd love to go through the gap analysis. If you're a guest and this is your first exposure to our team, I'll go through what our process is in terms of the gap analysis. It's very, very low-key, very friendly. What we do is we meet with individuals. There's no cost for the initial discussions. It's really just a get-to-know-you meeting. And we explore opportunities, what your concerns are, and like I said, it's very, very comfortable. At the end of that first discussion, people will decide whether they want to go through the analysis. And again, although we're not charging initially for that analysis, there is a commitment of time. So they're gathering information and having to meet and go through this process. That's really their commitment. Step 2 is we take the financial information and we begin to discuss goals and objectives. We take your life and your money and we link them together, and we talk about opportunities, whether you're on track, and it's a great, great discussion. Step 3 is prepare a financial forecast, and those forecasts help us to confirm planning opportunities, whether it's in estate planning or investment planning, tax planning, or retirement income planning. And step 4, we review the analysis and make adjustments as required. And so once we help someone in the implementation phase, we can assist them with the ongoing review of it. And once that happens, step 5, development of a final plan with implementation recommendations. So I think almost all of you who are not guests probably had gone through this process at one time. And so I think you can confirm that it's a very comfortable, fairly methodical, fairly precise process. But what it's designed to do is to give the individual some peace of mind about whether they're tracking in the right direction, and if they're not, specific recommendations that might be helpful to them. So I've got a handout there that talks about the gap analysis, I think, in the feedback form. Okay, so let's close up. Now, okay, so we have, I'll go through the different resources we put together. So we actually put together a whole suite of resources. Some of you as clients are familiar with some of these resources, but we try to pull them together in one kind of cohesive framework. The first thing is a retirement planning checklist. So make sure you let us know whether you want this resource, your name, your email address that you want us to use. This checklist is it's a great primer for those of you who are not retired yet. And you're going, I want to make sure I don't miss a few things in my preparation phase. The retirement planning checklist is something I put together. It kind of keys on the main areas you should be thinking about. So that's one of the pieces you'll get with the email attachment. It's a link. The second thing is I put together a series of questions that you should be asking your employer or HR department about your pension plan. So again, it's a primer to get you thinking about some of the key questions to ask. That's part of the package as well. We have budgeting for retirement. It's a video with some worksheets. So if you have not looked at your budgeting for a long time, you want to get a little more clarity on it, particularly if you're getting close to retirement. But even if you're not retired or are retired, I mean, it's a good exercise to do once in a while. Again, we'll make sure you get the resource and links to the video and the worksheets. So that concludes the presentation. Let us know. So if any of you want to make sure that you take advantage of the gap analysis, whether you're a guest or a client, make sure you let me know.
Well, that concludes this retirement presentation, Retirement Countdown. I hope you found it helpful. Our goal was to provide you with an overview on some of the key areas you need to begin thinking about as you plan for your retirement. So make sure that you take a look at the show notes for this particular presentation. We'll have helpful links about the resources that we discussed during this presentation. And as well, don't hesitate to contact our office to give us your feedback. And we provide the game plan service. If you want to get more one-on-one coaching around your retirement planning readiness, we'd be more than happy to talk to you about game plan, our game plan process, and to discuss whether it applies to your particular situation to give you confidence and peace of mind that you're tracking in the right direction for retirement. We can be reached at www.seanhumphreys.com, shumphreys@asante.com. Our direct phone line is 204-977-8022. You take care. All the best in your retirement planning readiness.